In this video, we'll see how Xarkin Studio can be used to generate physics-based motion for your characters. Before showing Xarkin Studio, let's begin with the end in mind. Here we are seeing a skeleton in Blender. This character is performing a running jump from right to left. This motion has been generated through the use of parameters within Xarkin Studio. After a couple of jumps, let's reveal another jump for this character. There are a few things to note. 1. This second character isn't jumping as high. 2. This results in less time and fewer frames, so this character comes to the sequence end ahead of our original character. Finally, a more subtle difference is the underlying Xarkin model generates slightly different motion so that the result is physically accurate for the desired height. It is also important to note that absolutely no keyframe tweaking has been done to this generated motion. This is what Xarkin brings. Through selecting a gate, modifying a parameter or two, character motion can be generated to fit the specific needs of a given sequence. Here we see a range of jumps, all slightly different based upon a single parameter adjustment. In the previous video, we went to Adobe's Mixamo and downloaded and imported an FBX character named Abe into Blender. We then opened Xarkin Studio, which in turn asked us to map this character to a Xarkin topology. Once mapped, we created a motion sequence for this character by loading and modifying gaits from the Xarkin cloud. Finally, we applied the generated motion back into Blender, effectively going from a T-pose to a running character in a matter of minutes. In this video, we are going to show more of Xarkin Studio's capabilities by showing the selection and modification of gaits in more detail. We will then import the generated motion sequences into Blender. Finally, we will show how simple it is to take motion created for one particular character and then apply it to another significantly different character. Often when people talk about retargeting, they are really talking about a small variation specific to a given character. Through the parameter-driven physics-based approach and Xarkin's simulation capabilities, retargeting takes on a whole new meaning. Let's start in Blender, back with Abe in his T-pose. Once you have your character, it is a good idea to immediately set your target frame rate. Once this has been set, we will launch Xarkin Studio from the Object menu. We only need one frame, and it is critical that we identify the root of the armature for Xarkin. In this case, it is called Mixamo Rig Hips. Once set, we launch. Immediately, Xarkin Studio expects us to map this character to a known Xarkin topology. First, we'll maximize this screen, and then we'll select the saved mapping from the previous video. Once we choose Old Abe, we can see this mapping's hidden segments and mappings on the right. We can scroll to zoom, and we can hold the left mouse button and drag to rotate and view the mapping from different angles. Let's click Done at the bottom left to proceed using the Old Abe mapping. We now see our skeleton on stage in Xarkin Studio. We'll enlarge this and get started. After confirming that Xarkin Studio is also at 60 frames per second, we'll load an action from the cloud. We will choose to replace the motion defined in the interval, which is all frames between the left and right triangles in the scrubber on the bottom timeline. It is a raw replacement with no blending between the existing frames and the replacements. We're going to choose a single run cycle. A cycle is any gate where the last frame of the loaded gate connects with the first frame of the sequence such that laying two or more cycles together shows a smooth motion without any noticeable transition issue between cycles. Once loaded, selecting the Interval tab will not only show the parameters for the interval, but the character on the stage now appears in motion. And once again, we can hold the left mouse button, rotate the view, and we'll come down and we'll play, and we'll start to see the Xarkin character in motion. Zoom in a bit. And right now the motion is pinned. I can also make the character run in place, which tends to be where I work. I can go through a full motion cycle, watching the character run, and slow it down to half speed and quarter speed. You can see that I'm at 60 frames per second, which is where I want to be. And we'll go back to running in place, and we'll change the perspective a bit. Now we had that original mapping, so we're going to show that original mapping, and now I can see that we're all lined up. I can also show the hidden segments from the mapping as well if I want. This will give me a better appreciation for what it's going to look like when I go back to Blender. And I'll turn that off. So we go back to the sort of normal view. We'll rotate to the side. Now we'll scrub through, and we can see the last frame here is frame 37. We'll keep that in mind as we make some adjustments to understand what Xarkin's doing. Scrubbing along will allow me to see the full motion of the Xarkin character. And we're going to make some changes to the interval. The interval is defined by the triangles on the timeline. We're going to change the duration to 8.5 seconds, up from 6.33. And as I apply this, when I come back and I play, we'll see that the mapping and the Xarkin armature are now separated. At this point, the Xarkin character is taking longer, because we asked it to go the same distance as the mapping is still going, because we haven't refreshed the mapping. Slowing it down and scrubbing through will show this difference. So it's just taking longer. Can also change the distance the character is traveling in that period of time, 8.5 seconds or 0.85 seconds. So we're going to increase from 2.965 all the way up to 3.7. And what we'd expect to see now is a longer stride, and there'll be a bit more motion because it's going to occur, and we'll adjust the time so that we get a full motion. So now when we play, we can see that the original mapping is finishing sooner. We scrub through. You can see that the longer stride of the Xarkin character versus the mapped character. And as we come through, we'll see the mapped character will end the motion cycle much faster than the Xarkin character, and the Xarkin character keeps on going and goes a further distance, because that's what we've asked of this motion cycle. We'll go back to the mapping, we'll do a refresh so everything's lined up, and now we see the character doing a longer stride than originally. Now I guess the question is, how do we apply this back into the world of Blender? Well, first we're going to save that as a mapped Mogen file, and I have a lot, so we're going to create a new folder here. So I'll just call this folder newer to store the motion. and we'll call this long stride. Having saved long stride, we'll reduce here. We'll go back to our world of Blender. We'll now import that motion to the character. And let's find where I'm at here. And we'll go to my Mogen, Abe Newer, and there's our long stride file. And we can control where we put it. This will take a few seconds. I'll shorten it in the video. We'll take the controlling segment off. And now we can see that we've gone from T-pose to having Abe do a nice long stride in one cycle. Okay, so we'll pause there. We'll undo that. We'll come back here in a few minutes once we've adjusted the motion a bit more. Now we can undo all those actions, reset the mapping, and we're back to where we were before we did anything. So now we have that character. We can take that character and we can similarly import that motion file. Just as we loaded an action from the cloud, we can import that motion file to Xarkin. So there's our motions there from the cloud. Let's load that Mogen file that we created. Okay, so let's load it. And there's the long stride. We open that up. We do a replacement. We make it raw. And we click OK. It's going to make sure that we're mapping the right character, and we are. And now that we've mapped it to the right character, let's see our motion, which we had. Now what we'll do is we're going to append a motion here. So let's here we are. We're playing the motion. Putting it in place, and we're going to pause. We'll take the cursor to the end. Notice the 52 frames, which was 37. That's because we increased the time earlier in the video. And now what we're going to do is we're going to not replace the motion that's there, but we're going to insert after the cursor. And we're going to blend between the two gaits, and we'll click OK. And once we do this, we'll see that original long stride, and it will end with a jog cycle. So we can see the jog cycle has been inserted. We've got the original long stride, and as we scrub through, as we come up to the end here, all that nice motion blending is automated, and we can see the character change into a jog right at the end of the run. So now when we do this in full, we can see we get a couple steps of a jog right at the end with no hitches. It's important to note we're doing no keyframe work here. And having done that, if we look at it mapped, got the original character. And now we're going to save that as a mapped Mogen file. And we'll just call it long stride with jog. And we'll save that. Back in Blender, we'll just do another import. Now we'll import that long stride with jog. Okay, after a few seconds of doing that, move the character back, and let's just hit play. So we see Abe with his 2 long strides and 1 jog stride. So all good so far. So now let's go back. We're back here and got our character running. We'll pause. We'll take it to the end again. And now what we're going to do is load another action from the cloud. It'll be an insert and a blend, but we're going to do a walk cycle at the very end. So after the cursor, we blend the motion, and so it will blend the last few frames of the jog into the first few frames of the walk. And now if we play, we can see the jog, then the walk, and of course we haven't refreshed the mapping, so the mapping just stops. And things go that way. So we'll now show the mapping. We'll do a refresh on the mapping. We'll play it from a bit of a different perspective. And now what we'll do is we're going to add a little bit of change to that walk cycle. We're going to take the marker on the left and the marker at the end. So we've defined an interval, and now we're going to work on the motion of that cycle. And all we're going to do is a simple head pitch. So the magnitude of this head pitch, I'm going to change it so that there's a 16-degree swing in the head. So the head will come forward 8 degrees, go back 16, come forward 16, and you'll have a nodding motion that occurs. So now when we apply that, immediately we get the idea that the mapping and the Xarkin character are a little out of sync. So when we play it, we get the walk with a nod. There we go. You'll also notice that just due to the nod itself, that actually changes the positions of the shoulders and the back. There's a slight change between the mapping and the Xarkin character. And that's because Xarkin is physics-based. It's always doing the correct physical action so that the motion is natural. So we'll save that file. We're going to call it long stride with jog and walk. With nod probably, yeah, we'll call it that. And now that we've saved that, we can go back to Blender. And we'll just undo the things we've done. Back to our T-pose character. We'll move that character along the timeline. We're going to import that full sequence. And yeah, this time we'll get rid of that armature segment. But first, it's going to take a bit longer. With each generation, the sequences are getting longer. There are more frames, so there's more pose data to be generated. Okay, so we've hidden that segment on the armature. We've now highlighted Abe. Now Abe runs, he jogs, he walks, and nods his head. So that concludes that part of the demo. Up to this point, we've been creating motion for the old Abe character, going back and forth from Blender and Xarkin Studio. Having done that, I want to now focus on how we could retarget the motion we've created to a new character. In this case, I've imported another FBX character downloaded from Mixamo, Timmy, onto the stage in Blender. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll do what I did with Abe, is I am going to take this, I'm going to launch the editor, and the root joint here is Mixamo Rig Hips. I'm all good there. We'll open up. And I've already mapped this character. So we've got Timmy, and we can go large here. We can see that, you know, Timmy fundamentally has a different physiology than old Abe did. He's shorter, for one thing. And I don't need to go into the specifics of that, but now we have Timmy on the stage in Xarkin. Now what's interesting here is previously when I saved the motion file that I created for Abe, I had saved it as a map.mogen file. I went back and I saved that file as a native Mogen file, and I can load a native Mogen file and apply that motion to Timmy. So if we look in my directory here, I've gone out and I've taken that long stride with jog and walk with nod as a native file, and I've saved that. So I'm going to open up this file. I'm going to replace the interval, do a raw replacement, and I'm going to apply that motion to Timmy. So if we look at it now and we go to the interval, we can now play. There's a few things to note here. Timmy's not quite as big, so the distance Timmy's traveling and the duration is different. Xarkin's automatically adjusted the motion generation information to fit Timmy's physiology. So if we hit simulate, it will make any minor corrections, but this is looking pretty good. And if I go to the mapping, you know, I can select Timmy and I can show that mapping, and now we have Timmy doing all the same things. Maybe do it full here so we can see it. Okay, and if we want, we can extend this out. Timmy's a bit of a different character, as we'll see. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now what we'll do is we'll just pause here, and now we're going to save this as a mapped Mogen file. We'll take this and we'll go up here, we'll go to Timmy, and we'll save the Timmy version of that file there. Now, having done that, let's go back into Blender and let's import that file. So we'll go to characters, we'll go up, we'll go to my Mogen, we'll go to Timmy, and there's the Timmy file right there. And now we'll load that editor file. This always takes a little bit of time. Okay, and we'll take Timmy back a bit. He's not going to travel as far, we'll just stick Timmy there. And we'll come to the armature as well, and we'll maybe hide that extra bone. Now we've got Timmy doing the same thing that Abe was. And that's what we mean when we talk about retargeting with Xarkin Studio. In this presentation, we showed the selection and modification of gaits in Xarkin Studio, importing generated motion into Blender, and then turning around and applying that generated motion to a new character. Our next planned video for the fall of 2021 will be a report on our progress in the area of quadrupeds. This video included characters from Adobe Mixamo. We thank Adobe for the use of these characters.